recording this webinar. It will be available for playback, and that will be up on our website at dclab.com. Also, one last time, if you have questions over the course of the webinar, please put them in your question bar that you should see on your panel. I'll be keeping track of them, and we will pose them to our speakers at the end of the webinar. Okay, so here we go. Starting with researching member needs, Barbara will speak then to the monitoring of advances and trends within society publishing and management. Her final comments will focus on the support and acceptance required for a truly innovative environment to flourish. Following that, Mark will expand on mining the gold to be found in all society programs, culling and clustering information from a variety of sources and formats, as made possible with new technologies. He will focus on this as he shares real-time case studies. With their combination of experiences across the entire spectrum, Barbara and Mark's comments should serve as an excellent starting point as you plan your golden publishing environment. And something you will notice over the course of the webinar, to emphasize that point, is that some of the text is actually in gold. Barbara will speak a little bit more to that. That is to highlight those areas that are your gold mine. And now I'd like to introduce Barbara Ford.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. We look forward to having you join the evolution. And first, we'd like to quickly review what we need to evolve. And those, of course, are the information and tools that we use in our research. We constantly need to monitor advances and trends. And, of course, the need to look at innovation as a piece of our culture. So to start, with any solid research program, there is the need to recognize the type of information necessary to provide you with the data required for your purposes. Coupled with that is the need to recognize how you'll use the results. Will you be looking for ways to enhance a product or service, develop a new product, or make some critical decision about current activities or future directions? Use of one type of research methodology, such as email surveys, can become dangerously repetitive and even numb your audience to their efforts, something we hope won't happen over the next hour. Carefully selecting the various types of methods and their frequency will contribute to your success. And finally, if the data you will be collecting needs to provide benchmarks at particular points in time, then you need to plan for that from your very first research project. So let's look at the types of information, and as Jennifer had said, in each of these we will be looking at those that are amongst the very rich little nuggets of gold that Mark will be referencing later. So being in the information business, we all know that there are three basic types of information. And the type of information we have available can be used in a variety of circumstances. So we'll look more closely at survey research in just a minute. But at the moment, I'd like to bring to your attention the fact that census data can also provide some valuable insights into the largest possible population of your community. As an example, I've selected the data table for scientists and engineers. But there's certainly data for every occupation in the country. Many of us have been involved with the creation of electronic versions of primary and secondary information over the years. But as we saw in the last slide, and see here, there are many more types of information that can be combined, sliced and diced, if you will, to produce useful resources for your members and the larger community. In the types of information shown here in gold, you should also add the final two as Mark speaks about mining your existing data. When it comes to research and development, A&I services, along with articles in a variety of periodicals other than journals, are the keys to maintaining your awareness of external trends and innovations. And finally, please don't ignore data available in tertiary publications to provide background and further statistics as you research potential changes in current products or work on prototypes for new ones. Again, There is gold in them our handbooks that you've worked so hard to produce. Harken back to your class days and remind yourself of when you use quantitative data versus qualitative. When you want to view a more definitive picture of how many members have certain mobile devices, for example, or how often they access a particular database, then quantitative data resulting from solid research is the way to go. However, when you're interested in behavior and motivations, attitudes and opinions, then you'll be using methods such as interviews and focus groups to obtain qualitative data. And such data are especially helpful in helping to guide the direction of your program. So many of you, I'm sure, have experience with online surveys using such tools as SurveyMonkey, Survey Gizmo, Question Pro, and Zoomerang, to name a few. I'm sure you're aware of focus groups and interviews as being reliable methods as well. I've certainly worked with all these tools successfully over the decades and wouldn't give them up. But there are others you can use as well. Collecting feedback on a continuing basis from visitors to your website and participants in your online forums can be extremely telling in knowing which way the wind is blowing on certain key issues. Although anecdotal or secondhand feedback could not stand up to close scrutiny on its own, it's a source of attitudes and ideas that might be tested via more rigorous research methods. And finally, societies have some of the best opportunities for learning about individuals already built in. Their annual meetings, committee meetings, working groups, and educational programs. I strongly recommend that you design appropriate ways to solicit comments from participants at all these events. When you first start planning any research exercise, you do some sort of SWOT analysis. And oftentimes, collecting and monitoring the external opportunities and threats becomes just a snapshot experience. It's very important to keep abreast of what's going on, not just in publishing, but in the larger research communities and the world markets. The general top-level domains are going to be especially important to us over the rest of the year as new general top-level domains come into place. This is going to be very important with regards to your position in the community, people accessing your information, and making sure that your metadata is up to snuff. One of the other examples, Chorus, is very, very important for us. The continuing evolution under the leadership of Howard Ratner as its director is an activity that's going to make a big change for all journal publishers. Through Chorus, a partnership between publishers and federal research funders will provide public access to the results of federally funded research and will include peer-reviewed publications, agency reports, and associated data. So everyone does need to keep informed of its progress and seriously consider becoming one of the participating publishing organizations if you haven't already. And finally, a final example is noticing that while we have been brought to the recognition that different markets require different approaches, and we have gotten fairly good at dealing with our consortial sales to BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Just recently, the major leaders in market research have found that Peru, the Czech Republic, Turkey, Colombia, and Malaysia have become very strong as emerging markets. These are areas that you need to investigate. So staying on top of innovations in the dynamic digital production environment, and more specific examples will come from Mark on that later on, is certainly a challenge. So if interested, please do send me an email. I'll gladly share the list of online newsletters and LinkedIn groups I receive, but unfortunately it's too long to include here. However, 2 announcements this month brought a few interesting things to my attention. First, it made me aware of Vink, which is being touted as a portal to adjacent content. I certainly urge you all to learn more about it. I think this is going to be one of the major multimedia forms that we'll be using in the future. The other is one of several annual awards I try to track. This one for innovation from the Publishing Business Group. And as you notice, one of our SDM colleagues, the American Physical Society, was selected for actually several activities. One being a new journal of applied physics that's aimed at a broader community and a more rounder research profile. The second, involvement in chorus. And finally, the APS Bridge program to increase the number of minority students receiving PhDs in physics. This is certainly one that we can relate to very easily. However, looking at the other two innovators, we see that AIM, in its 50 magazine group, went and acquired a new business to provide it with a new platform creating branded TV and video in collaboration with its magazines. Once again, this concept of multimedia comes to the fore. And the other winner was Sourcebooks. They've embraced digital publishing with a wide selection of ebooks. And the one that I think is very interesting in terms of their new apps is Put Me in the Story, allowing parents to personalize their children's books, which I'm definitely going to consider when my grandchildren have their next birthdays. Looking at trends, it's essential to stay on top of trends in publishing. Again, newsletters and blogs are the best ways to help you do so. The one called Research Information is one of the best, in my opinion. Just days after Cian Harris shared his thoughtful list of 10 trends in Germany, they actually had the entire presentation posted. So rather than take up precious minutes now, afterwards we'll send out an email to give you the link so that you can learn about each one of them. When you meet with your colleagues for a creativity session, idea generation is the new brainstorming, sort of like 60 being the new 30. These are a few suggestions to frame your thinking. Consider the findings of each research project, the trends you've been tracking, innovations you've learned about, and general news about publishing and your community's interest in light of these 5 key concepts. There are many, many approaches to fostering innovation, so I've selected 3 to share with you. Approach 1 looks at 2 areas. First, key constraints and options. Research where you might have 5 new markets, investing the time to look at new patterns, early stage innovations, and emerging markets, much as the ones we talked about earlier in Peru, the Czech Republic, Turkey, Colombia, and Malaysia, so that you're looking to the future rather than basing conclusions on the past. The second view is on areas that you should not play into, as has been the case many times in the past. Number 1, don't be afraid to compete against yourself and use parts of current products to create new ones. If you are to lose market share, wouldn't it be best to lose it to yourself? And number 2, don't just dismiss a different approach as disruptive and therefore being worse. They're just different. Where might Western Union be now if it hadn't dismissed Bell's telephone as an electrical toy? And finally, disruptive ideas hardly ever use current channels. Be open-minded and you might find a long-standing new distribution mode. The second approach that I have here to innovation focuses on the environment you create in your organization. You might look at these and say they're only appropriate for a technology company. But wait, aren't publishers using technology to bring about new ways of creating and accessing information. This approach needn't be followed 100%, but there must be some ideas here that could be adapted to your society. For example, interns have been used for decades to round out staffing. Why not have a contest for a student to, quote, win employment in your organization? Have students compete with their idea of how best to improve one of your current workflow blockages, or design a new promotion for membership, or come up with a way to integrate social media into your communications with members in the larger community. The winner would get an internship working at the society, perhaps some scholarship monies, or whatever is most appropriate given your society's culture. And my last but not least example looks first at starting that creativity session with some things you can do to get ideas flowing. Simplify by starting with a concept composed of minimum information, forcing the group's brains to fill in the gaps with their details, not yours. Virtualize. This concept smacks of Google and Amazon, which separate information from various sources in order to make different areas more efficient or effective. Flip means just that. Take what's being done now, flip it around, see what can happen. And subconscious ideation, according to Darren Eich, is, quote, a fancy way of saying, shut up and let your brain think about the problems on its own. Take conversations from meetings and let them move around in your brain while you're sleeping, exercising, or taking a shower. Removing pressure often allows the brain to release some powerfully great ideas. Now, I got a bit ambitious here, and in order to stay on time, I'm going to address the 16 techniques for innovation next month. I hope you'll be listening, but we'll move on for now. Could you advance the slide for me, Jennifer? It's not going.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Beautiful. Appreciate it.
Sure.
We often think that you need to be creative to be an innovator, but it really takes much more. That's why the number of latent innovators is so much larger than the number of actual innovations. Just having the creative idea isn't enough. You need to be able to take it through the stages of development, production, and implementation. So in order to get the very best of ideas, you need to be opportunistic and identify gaps in the market. You need to be educated. Contrary to popular opinion, most successful innovators aren't dropout geniuses, but rather well-trained experts in their fields. Because without expertise, how do you distinguish between relevant and irrelevant information? Persistence is needed. Most innovators are more resilient and energetic than their colleagues. Prudence serves innovators well. They need to be organized and cautious when taking risks. Risk is often linked to business formation, but not necessarily to business success. And finally, social capital. Serial innovators use their networks to mobilize resources and build alliances internally and externally to the success of their concept. I have to call you again, Jennifer. Thank you. Now here's where senior and middle managers need to work together. You need to identify the areas for change, and you need to share why these areas need change. And finally, you have to have, you need to have all staff involved in generating ideas that will make the proper change happen. And finally, when change does happen, even if it's just a baby step, let everyone know so they can share in the excitement. Now, obviously, there are many more areas to cover with regard to making sure your organization evolves to the point where innovation and change become a part of your culture. So, come next month, we will look at some specific ways to overcome challenges to change, pump up your powers of persuasion, and evaluate innovation. But for right now, I'd like to welcome my colleague Mark Gross so that he can get into some wonderful examples of innovation. Mark?
Okay, Barbara, that was very good. Thank you. And I think your analysis of the various trends out there was excellent. I'm going to not so much focus on trends, but focus on some things that I've a little bit of trends, but really going through some case studies of things that I've been seeing among our clients, which I think are very innovative in terms of what's going on out there. Jennifer, do I have control of the keyboard? Oh, yes, I do. Okay. So just in terms of trends, I want to focus a little bit about what's driving some of these things that's going on right now. And I've titled this slide, What's Driving the Move to XML for Societies. I think more accurate is what's driving the move to digitization for society, because as we'll see, not all of it needs to be in XML to be very valuable and to be able to make use of what you have. And I think the key point is societies are sitting on information gold mines, a term we've heard already several times in the course of the last 20 minutes or so. And I think why that is because societies, and each one is different, and I love them all, and they're all collecting some very interesting information. It's all very unique. And they've been collecting information for decades, and in some cases for centuries. And it's all information that may not be available anywhere else. A lot of unique information, esoteric information. We'll go through a little bit of that later on in specific examples. And traditionally, this information has only been accessible to limited audiences. Usually the members of that particular society, people involved in that particular discipline or that little micro-discipline knew about the information and had access to it. And frequently, you had to travel someplace to be able to look at any of this material. While the members of society had subscriptions, they got material sent to them, and that was really where it was limited to. The internet has really changed everything. You've heard that phrase before, I'm sure, but I think just some specific things that relate to the kinds of collections, the kind of materials that societies have. One is findability. I thought I made up that word, but I actually found it in a dictionary. But what's happened is that improved search, and you look at Google and all the other search devices you have, but it's also specialized search devices, are capable of making your material visible to the whole world. So documents that are very localized now, they can be imaged, they can be digitized, and can be visible from anywhere. And accessibility, which is, not just being able to find it, but once material is found, it can be accessible anywhere. It can be delivered anywhere. It can be visible from any place, which leads to inexpensive distribution and redistribution. There's a very low cost to deliver materials today. You don't have to anymore copy it, put it in boxes, send it out. It's just be done electronically. And the whole concept of redistribution, or we think of retweeting, but it's once material has been sent someplace, there are aggregators, there are all kinds of groups that can send the information to others. Of course, it's the other piece of it, how do you keep it confidential? How do you keep it, how do you control access as a counterpart of this? And the fourth, I think a fourth factor in all this is the granularity of the information. Whereas we used to think of things as of documents as whole documents or all collections. Really, you can now once you digitize, and if you're going to XML, you could do it at a much higher level, at a much more fine level. You can distribute just parts of a collection or parts of a document. You can separate out abstracts and send out collections of abstracts by themselves, and you can do that very easily. Versus sending a whole article, or versus sending out an article along with its backup information and charts and all kinds. So there's a lot of ways once you're digital that you can deliver information, and you've got a lot of information to be able to deliver. And I think all this leads to a concept that is known in the TV and movie world as going into syndication. The fact is that movies make a lot more money, make most of the money not in their prime release, the first week they go out, or the first 5 weeks, but really later on as they get redistributed to television and worldwide syndication, all those kind of things. And this concept of going to syndication is now available to societies that have usually just been limited to where they're working more locally. I've seen articles and books that have only been only been accessible to dozens or hundreds of people. Now they're available to the whole world, which means that if they can find it, there might be audience orders of magnitude larger than there were before. They also have a longer shelf life. It's not just sending it out now, but just like in the movie syndication, it could be sent out 5 years from now and 10 years from now, and older material has a shelf life that still has very high value. And a third factor here is it can be incorporated into other products, and I think we'll see some examples of that in the next couple of slides. I went in the last few weeks and spoke to several of my clients, not in a scientific manner, just to get a sense of what it is that they've seen as most important in terms of what moving to digital information has made a difference in their operations. And spoke to MIT Press, and their focus has been that they've gone already, it's already several years now that they've gone to an XML upfront process for their publishing materials. And I know MIT Press is not a society, but I think it's a nonprofit, and it's got the same kind of materials as I think it's very relevant over here. They've gone through an XML process for most of the materials, so that rather than going through the traditional process of going through the traditional publishing process and then digitizing afterwards and making it available, they've gone through XML up front and produce all their materials from the XML. Now, it's not a simple process, and it's spent several years getting to that point. But what they've told me, and the literature shows, is that it's really made some very clear production improvements. It's improved their schedule to produce product because it's all once materials are in. They immediately are able to work with and process it, and they're moving material around electronically through the whole peer review process and all those other steps. It's reduced cost. I don't have I haven't been able to quantify it, and I think it's something that's hard to quantify these things. And I think, and one of the most important things they've said is that it really gives them an opportunity for better quality control of the materials they have. Because if you're in XML, you can do things like make sure your abstracts are always in there and they're always the right length and that the references are correct and that they match up to some database. All those kind of things can be done in the process of production, not as an after or as a separate piece. And so those are the three major things that they've seen as far as their production improvements. But it's also given the ability to innovate with new capabilities. And they're able to come out with new forms of products very quickly and professionally. So once you're in XML, you not only can produce your print book, but you can also produce your ebook with very little additional effort. And you can produce special versions of things. You can produce special editions of documents. You can collect materials that you may have published over a period of 10 years and produce a special edition of interest to some special group. And that all can be done much more easily once everything's organized in this kind of process. And I think, and the point they made that was, I think, most interesting is that it makes it very easy to prototype new products. It's very difficult sometimes to know what people out there want, and especially, I mean, in your society, you have contact with a lot of the people there, especially in a smaller society. A large society may not, but especially when you're looking at material, what's the demand in the outside world? You sometimes don't really know without trying it out. And trying it out traditionally has been it's been expensive, and so the flip side over here is that by being electronic, by being in XML, it's very easy to create a new product. It's very easy to just identify which kind of articles you want to put together and put them together. You can take the pieces of articles and say, I just want to produce an issue that just has abstracts and some other pieces of the articles. So prototyping has been a major advantage. Then moving on to another client of ours, the Optical Society. And I spoke to Scott Deneen on this. He originally said there were 5 major points, but as we spoke, I think there were like 7 or 8 or 9. So I'll just go through some of the things that they're doing. Now, what Optical Society has done is they've taken their whole collection of journals and articles and various books and all kinds of things like that and moved it online. And they made a decision early on to go to XML and to go to a very fine level of XML, where not only is the article split apart, but all the references are broken apart into the individual pieces. All the images are laid out, and all the captions are captured separately. All the formulas, the math, rather than just capturing images of the math, they chose to go into MathML and actually have a mathematical representation in XML. And they did this with the intent that this is going to be a tremendous, while it's a tremendous investment for them, it's also a tremendous opportunity. And they've already started putting things out and have, I mean, I think the whole collection will be something like 700,000 pages, all split apart in this way. So just going through some of the things that they think are going to be very helpful is citations. And just going back to the Optical Society is everything optics, a lot of physics, and it goes back to 1917. So it's a very very rich collection going back quite far. So this over here illustrates that when they get citation lists, they can look at a citation not just within an article itself, but they can look at the citation and look at it from the reverse view. This is a particular citation. They can go from here and look at the article that it was cited in. They can look at the full text. They can look at parts of the article. They can look at other people that were cited in that article. And they can look at things like statistics on how many times this particular article was referenced in different places. And all kinds of things like that are available once they've split things apart and put together those kind of metrics. Equations. So you can imagine the Optics Society has some very complex equations. This is a relatively simple one. Sometimes they run for a whole page. But what's important is that if this was done as an image, then that'll look good on a page as it is, but once you wanted to reformat a page and be able to use it on your cell phone, on your smartphone, or be able to do it on different devices, it may become too small or too large to fit in with the rest of the text. By being able to work with it this way, they're able to, the equations can change in size very easily. But also, by having the equations separately, the equations can be pulled over and moved into other places. They can build collections. They can pull out their equations and build up collections of equations that appear in different places and all kinds of comparisons. So once you put this together, it becomes a very, very rich resource. Another area of focus was images, and they chose to keep images apart and actually build an image data bank. So each image is coordinated with the caption that appeared with it, and also where it appeared in an article. So you can go into an article and be able to look at all the images in an article separately, but you can also go against the whole image database. This top image, the image on the top right of here, so it looked like a special one for Halloween to me. It looks like a ghost, but I don't think it really is. So, but they've got, and I see on the left side of it, 345,000 images in their data bank. So there's a lot of richness to their collection. Other things that come up once you get there is semantic search and indexing. So I'll talk about the semantic web out there, but it's really not so complex. I think if you like even Google has gone to more semantic searching now. So when you do a search based on a sentence you type in, it'll find things that are closer to what you want. The Optical Society looked for exactly the same thing in their materials. It is a large collection, and when you do a search, they can weight the results based on where your search terms are. So a search term is more important perhaps in a title than it is in the middle of an article. It may be more important in the first paragraph than elsewhere. It may be more important in a caption of an image than elsewhere. So by being able to break apart documents like this, they're able to allocate importance. They can do a lot of analytics. They can keep track of what's being looked at, what parts of an article are being looked at, what's of interest to special collections, frequency of topics that are being looked at. And the fact that they've got all this material electronic gives them increased flexibility both in subscriptions. So you can now sell subscriptions to parts of the collection, but also you can make special collection. You can they can have a 100th anniversary edition for their materials. They can be limited to certain types of articles in different areas. And for them, another area that was very important also is better editorial control. Because on a regular basis, as they bring articles in, they can check them to make sure they're right. They use Schematron, which is software that's designed for looking through XML, and also other QA software. They can review documents, check references, go against databases, and things like that. And the last society I'm going to talk about is the American Alpine Club, which, and they did not go to XML. So again, I should have changed this to digital formats out of XML before. And each one of these groups, each of these societies is really dealing with some very unique information. I love them all. This is really a marvelous collection over here of archives on climbing and mountaineering worldwide. Extensive collections of maps and pictures of climbing expeditions, pictures of mountains, pictures of routes, expedition diaries, journal articles, artifacts. I mean, they've got like the backpack that was used for for North Pole and things like that. So it's a marvelous, marvelous collection. They opt, and it goes back. Their earliest articles go back to 1907, so it goes back pretty far. And they also have this collection, which I thought was very unique, of accident reports, and they keep track of accidents reported worldwide on various places. And the accident reports go back to 1949. Unbelievable collection. So They opted not to go XML because they didn't think they really needed it at this time. But what their focus was that the pictures were the quality of images and pictures was very important, and the quality of maps was very important. So a lot of the focus in our work with them was really on making sure that we got the very highest quality images. And the pages themselves are all CR'd, so we did optical character recognition there, but we didn't go and clean everything up, which would have added costs, and they thought it was good enough for the search kind of things they were going to be doing. So there's many different ways that you can be doing this. But they did collect a lot of metadata about each image and about each map, which was extracted. And while it was extracted using XML technology, it was actually put into a database that they did. So they're not using XML, but they're using all these databases. So once they've got this information, they've already have it online. You can go on their website, you can see the accident reports, you can see a lot of this material. But the kind of things that are important to them is to geotag all the materials. So you can imagine if every image and every map is tagged with where in the world this material belongs, they can put together collections of, that relate to a particular spot in the world, and all the pictures related to it, all the maps related to it, different views, different accident reports. So this is the kind of thing that's very important to them. They're also specifically with accident reports, different terms are used over time. So their intent is to put together authority lists to go back and normalize what's going on so that they can do better searches. And this will allow them to build all kinds of special collections, both for members and for the outside world. So each one of these is really very unique, and each has its own issues, but each one of them is material that was probably unknown to most of the world and now can become much better known because they've gone to the level of digitizing it. So well, the details of how to go about to execute a plan like this is going to be in the next session. Just to summarize what it is I think that you need to do in order to get there, and as you can see from these three examples, every case is a little bit different. But I think the first step is really to determine what it is that you have, inventorying the materials, and you don't have to count everything, but sort of how many file cabinets, how many shelves, and how much of it is material that's unique to your collection. What form is it in? Is it all in rare documents that can't leave your facility, or is it materials that can be done that can be moved out? Is it materials that cannot be unbound, or materials that can be unbound? Are there electronic materials that you can use that will give you a heads up? Like for the Optical Society, the last 10 years of materials were electronic already, although they were in a different form than was going to be needed. So that the decision there was to first do those 10 previous years, and then do the others as they went along. How far back do you want to go? My question, I'm always surprised that really the value of materials goes back a lot further than you think. You think in science, maybe only the last 5 years are of value, or the last 10 years, but it turns out that the Optical Society decided to go back all the way to the beginning, going back to 1917. I discussed this at Barbara a few weeks ago, and she said she was dealing with a group of botanists, and they explained to her that in botany, some studies are going back 200 years is the most recent study on a particular species, a particular plant. So it really depends on where you are, but you may want to go further back than you think. And then deciding what it is that you need. I think, is it all going digital? Does it all have to go to XML? You may find, like the Alpine Society, that going just without XML is probably good enough for now, and they actually planned everything so that they can go to XML later if that made sense. And setting your priorities. Do you need all those materials? Which materials are of most value? How far back? And which things do you do first? Very often, these are 2, 3, 5-year projects. So what do you do in year 1, year 2, and so on? And I think all this goes into developing a plan. The plan I'm talking about here is really what it is that you're going to do first and what you can do next, and just in terms of what it is that you need to do. And the execution is something we would talk about at the next session. And I think I'm done. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you, Mark and Barbara, so much. We are going to take some questions from the audience. We have a little bit of time. We do have about 5 or 10 minutes for questions, probably about more like 5 minutes. So I'm just going to ask right now if you need anything clarified from the webinar, but also if you have specific questions about your society, about how to plan, please feel free to put those in your question bar now, and I am tracking them from Mark and Barbara. While you take a couple minutes to do that, I'm just going to run through very briefly information on our companies. Myers Consulting Services is, of course, Barbara's company, and this tells you a little bit about the kind of assistance she provides to her clients. You can find out more about her at the web address at the bottom, www.bmyersconsulting.com. Again, this deck, not the deck, I'm sorry, but the playback of this webinar will be available online, so if you need to get any of this information, you can either write it down now or it will be accessible to you when we send it out. And I work here at DCL, so I'm going to tell you really briefly about our company. We are a data conversion firm. I think Mark spoke rather eloquently over the course of his examples about what we can provide for societies. But we have a long history in the industry, and people ask me sometimes what conversion means. It means everything from ebooks to large-scale conversion. So we blend our years of conversion experience with cutting-edge technology and the infrastructure to make the process easy and efficient. We transform all kinds of content, so maybe even some things you may not realize counts as content. This gives you a good overview. Serving a very broad client base, spanning all industries. And now we're going to open the floor, as it were, up to questions. Just give me one moment here while I undock my pane so I can see what you guys are curious about. Okay, Dorothy asks, do you recommend JATS? Do you recommend JATS as an XML standard? I think that's a question for Mark.
I think it depends a little bit on the context, but the JATS DTD has gained a lot of momentum over the last few years and is now being used in a lot of areas. I think something like half of our conversions right now are to the JATS DTD. So if your material fits into that model, it's certainly a good place to start. It's ready to come out of the box. And NIH has certainly made a lot of investment to make it work and have tools available. So it's certainly a good choice. But it depends on your materials.
Okay, thank you. This is a great question. I think it's probably applicable to a lot of our listeners today. Tracking all these different sources of information seems like it could be overwhelming. How would you suggest we manage that with just a few staff members? Barbara, why don't we start with you, and then if Mark has anything to add, he can go ahead and do that.
Okay. Well, the obvious one, of course, is to divvy it up across staff members, and that will work if you, unfortunately don't have all these folks overloaded to begin with, because they can go and divvy up the various blots and newsletters that go along with their own aptitudes and personal interests. You might also use that intern that I gave as an example of, having that person really take over the research efforts and, offload that burden from staff. The important thing, however, though, is to make sure that whatever the researcher, the intern has done doesn't get lost, and that you somehow internalize that function in some way. So there's obviously a lot of other ways to look at that, but I think those are two fairly common and easily easily implemented.
Right. I would just add, and I'm not sure it's much of it, that I think everybody has limited resources, and dividing and conquering is probably their approach. You probably know more about material. It's not just start from scratch and start going. The librarians, the people, the subject matter experts in the organization really know what's most important, and I would suggest that start with the things that are most important and just get an inventory and get a handle on it, and the details can be done a lot of times later and over a period of time. And if this is spread out in phases over a period of 2, 3, 4 years, it may not be so overwhelming.
Here's one, Mark. You spoke about how it's not always easy to quantify return on investment. So I'm just saying that as an aside. But the question is basically how do you quantify return on investment? Can you talk about how maybe that can be discussed internally, either for any of the societies you use them as examples, because you might know about that from a business perspective, or just in general. That's a question I think comes up across industries: is how do we explain the ROI?
Right, and that's a good project I've been trying to work on for a while, but it really is very difficult because, first of all, there's an investment up front, so it takes a few years till an organization is really there and able to compute ROI, and then most organizations really keep that very close to the chest because that's a competitive information that they don't want to disclose. So I think if you lay out what the pieces are, I think you can compute what the potential ROIs are, but I think it's been very difficult to get internal numbers. I've not been successful on that so far.
Okay. I just want to, we have a couple more questions from the audience, but we seem to be slowing down, so I just want to remind everybody, if you have any questions, please feel free to type that into the question bar on your screen, and I will pose those to Mark and to Barbara. Let's see. How do we determine what information to digitize? I think you spoke to that pretty well in terms of all the various examples, but I think maybe the meat of the question there, and the person who asked it can correct me if they want in the question bar. I guess really, how do we get started? I think that's something we hear at DCL quite a bit. I'm sure, Barbara, you hear that too from your clients, is where to begin.
Yes.
Do we digitize everything? Do we digitize some of it? Are we missing some aspect of what could be valuable? How might you guide a society through that process?
Well, I think that one of the first things you need to do is to look at what your members and your community at large have told you within, the last couple of years at the very most as to what they really need. I'm sure that they have not been shy about letting you know, and to take that as some of your starting points so that you can go and prioritize whether or not, you're going to, take on the very tough project of going all the way back. It's not something to be done lightly, and definitely most likely any of the societies would be doing this in stages, and how would be the best way to approach that. So some of that qualitative data that I talked about gathering early on from folks at annual meetings and workshops and so forth might be very helpful in guiding you in that regard.
Okay. Thank you. Here's a question from Emily. You have focused on XML. Any idea on the possible market for general transcription work, say from handwriting to digital content? Any research done there? I know on our side, I believe there has been. Maybe the question is about leveraging how to leverage or how to work with handwritten materials.
Right. So handwritten material is difficult to transcribe. There certainly has been a lot of research, which and I've looked at a lot of it for automated handwriting recognition, but I think it's relatively primitive. But given that, I have looked at some materials, like, for example, that was consistent over time, like the 1700s legislative reports that were done with a certain handover period of time. And there we have had some success in automated conversion there. So there is possibility there. Most handwriting is really done by hand, by hand. And there's some of that being done. But that's still a slow and expensive process. The other area of transcription is really from video and from video and audio, and we do a lot of that kind of transcription. Most of it is done by people listening and working from it, but we have had some success with automated transcription for when the voices are clear and it's mostly single or double voices. So there is potential there for people with collections like that. If you go on the Department of Energy website, there is a site where they have lectures that have been given over the last few years, and there is a transcription of that was all done automatically. So it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. So it may be good enough for the purposes.
Okay, we are just at the end of our time, coming up on 2 o'clock Eastern Time. So I want to thank you both, Barbara and Mark, for a great webinar, and thank you to everybody who joined us today. We hope you'll join us for the 3rd part in the series, and we will be sending out information on that soon. If we did not get to answer your question, because I do see now that a couple more are coming in, we are tracking them, so I will make sure that Barbara and Mark get that information, and they will be able to relay it to me, and I'll get back to you as soon as I am able to. Barbara, Mark, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.